Hello, and welcome to the Save Our Children podcast. We're your hosts, Becky and Bridget. If you have been following the border crisis or the riots over this last year, then we have a treat for you today. Jorge Ventura is a field reporter and contributor to the Daily Caller. You will often see his stories about what's going on at the border cities throughout Texas, California, and Arizona. He also has his own news channel called the Ventura Report. His goals in creating the channel were to be able to provide coverage on politics that focused on just the facts. So many people are tired of mainstream media due to their bias while reporting. His news stories are raw, real, unbiased, and truthful. We definitely appreciate his work and are so excited to have him on our podcast today. Thank you so much for joining us. Can you give us just a little bit about your background and what brought you to be a frontline journalist?
Yeah, so my name is Jorge Ventura, currently a field reporter right now with the Daily Caller, 26 years old. I kind of came onto the scene, I would say, let me see. Well, I went to community college about 3 or 4 years ago, did my major in journalism, so started off before it got all crazy. And the funny thing is, I was actually going to school to be a sports reporter. I actually hated politics. I never
Wow.
really pictured myself in that world. My dreams at that time were to be on like the ESPN, Fox
Yeah.
Sports. Went down that road. And then after 2016, obviously you guys know the media landscape changed. And when I would actually talk to my friends who were on the right, they felt that Donald Trump didn't get a fair kind of media coverage. The CNN, MSC, NBCs of the world just went hard at him. So they felt that the media was really unfair. But then also when I would talk to my friends who are left wing, like the Bernie Sanders supporter friends, they also felt the same about Bernie, how he didn't get a fair share. And at that time, I've never voted before, wasn't into politics, but I felt like, you know what, maybe if I got into this new world, I could be a new voice, be down the middle type of guy and just keep it raw. So I started reporting on political events in California during my time in community college. I even covered when that caravan came in 2018. I actually went to Tijuana, Mexico, and covered that migrants. Even when I was in community college, my professors weren't happy about that, but they were happy after when the story was done. So I kind of was in that world, really working hard. The problem is though, coming from a community college as a journalist student, you're going to get overlooked by every internship when it comes to this. So, I couldn't get an internship. It was very difficult for me. The only internship I got at that time was with Telemundo, actually. So I did sports with them, and it was very successful internship. At the end of my internship, the media manager at that time, he told me, he said, "Hey, Jorge, I would love to hire you. You have great work ethic and everything. You're in there. You only got one flaw." And I said, "What's the flaw?" He said, "I could see it in your eyes. You can't pick between being a sports reporter or being a political reporter." He says, "All I could tell you is you got to pick one because you can't do both." And so I kind of knew right then. I'm like, you know what? My heart's not in the sports anymore. It's just not exciting. It doesn't draw me in. And anytime that I would report on politics, people would DM me instantly, would be like, "Hey man, I'm not getting this coverage anywhere. Really like the way you do it." So I was like, you know what? I'm going full into politics, kept doing my thing. And finally I got on the radar of the Daily Caller around the end of 2019. I got on their radar. So the Daily Caller, for those who don't know, it was founded by Tucker Carlson in 2010. They're based out of Washington, D.C. You got your conservative political reporting. So they were like, "Hey, we'll give you an internship, but we honestly don't know how it looks like because that's when COVID started." So COVID started right in
Right.
2020.
Mhm.
So a lot of the internships who were thinking of me, they were basically shut it down because of COVID. But Daily Caller, by the grace of God, was like saying, "Hey, we don't know what an internship with us looks like yet with COVID. Our newsroom is shut down, but why don't you come in the summer and we'll figure something out?" So I came in the summer of 2020. I left California to Washington, D.C. May 21st. So basically, the way I had it in my head is I had this romanticized fantasy feel of worldview of I'm going to go to DC and I'm going to be wearing a suit and I'm going to be interviewing congressmen and senators and I'm just going to be in that life.
Mhm.
When I got there, it wasn't that. They had me basically doing all the work that the other reporters didn't do. So a lot of video editing, and I was doing that. So I came there May 21st. 5 days later, or yeah, it was a couple of days later, Minneapolis Police Department releases the George Floyd tapes, and the whole country just changed. So the first night that the tapes were released, Minneapolis rioted. I don't know if you guys remember, but they burned down the Minneapolis Police Department. I remember watching the live streams in DC. The very next day, the riots came to Beverly Hills. It was like 2 p.m. I'm talking about in a daylight, and they were breaking into the Gucci store and all that. Then the night, then May 27th came. So the night of May 27th, I'll never forget, because actually I was at my uncle's house. That's who I was staying with in Virginia, and I got a call around midnight, a little bit past midnight, from our producer, and he was just yelling on the phone. He was like, "Jorge, we need a reporter on the ground. There's a riot at the White House, and they just put Trump under a bunker. You got like these Black Lives Matter people are fighting the Secret Service." And I was like, "What?" And I turned on the live stream, and I'm like, "Oh my God, they're literally in front of the White House, and Trump is under a bunker." So I get to the White House, and within my first 10 minutes, if you guys remember, there was a Fox News reporter. His name is Leland Vittert. So Leland Vittert, he was getting ready to do his live news report from the White House. The problem is as soon as those protesters find out that he was part of Fox News, they started beating him up, and they started beating up his cameraman. They stole his mic. So right there, I had no idea what was happening. So I just filmed the whole attack.
You want me to what?
Yeah. I started, I'm an intern. Like I'm a kid just from Palmville, kind of small town type of kid. This I've never experienced anything like this. So I filmed Leland getting attacked, and I put the video on Twitter. I put, breaking Fox News reporter Leland Ventura attacked in front of the White House. What I didn't know at that time is just as an intern, I was actually breaking the biggest story in Washington, D.C. for the weekend. So by the time I got back to my uncle's, the video had like 100,000 views, and I was like, wow. And then I fell asleep, woke up the next morning. I woke up to every single mainstream news station saying, we're going to, play your story. We're going to run your story. I believe on Monday, they asked President Donald Trump about the story. And I was just like, what is happening?
Wow.
And then that same night, Tucker Carlson played the video. So basically within my first 6 days in DC, I didn't know that I broke the biggest story and basically put me on the map. And my editors, immediately were like, hey, you were going to be a regular intern. You're basically ready to go now. And essentially what happened is, what I didn't know at that time was that the riots were going to go all summer in every major city. So that's how I think a lot of people kind of recognize my work, because that's when I think that was my coming onto the scene where, I reported on the riots all summer long. And basically last October, Daily Caller was like, hey, we're gonna sign you. And ever since then, I've been their frontline guy. So basically that's what kind of propelled me in a way is how I got here. I know it's a little long story, but it's
a great story.
It's a way to break it down of how it all happened.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. And we've been following you and your stories, and even just you being in Yuma. Honestly, thank you. And we appreciate your time, especially coming off. Literally, you're on the front lines in the heat of it all. And with the whole border crisis, you being in Yuma, even this past weekend, you encountered even with an armed human smuggler. And if we can just go into that, because you are sharing so many stories that you won't see on mainstream media, and so many things on mainstream media always get twisted. So we appreciate your work and everything that you're doing, because you're giving so many people, especially in the human trafficking world, you're a powerful voice for the voiceless, because you're bringing the truth to the people. And that's what so many are striving for right now. So thank you.
No, thank you. I really appreciate that. And that's kind of a thing that motivates me is that term, voice for the voiceless. Even immediately, guys, after the riots, I went back to California, and that's when a lot of our small businesses were shut down and went out of business for good. And, during that time, I interviewed countless numbers of business owners or restaurant owners that lost everything, who sacrificed everything. I also, right immediately after that, spent time interviewing all the parents in California that were facing these school lockdowns and speaking to kids directly. This wasn't even just always with the parents. I'm speaking to the kids directly about the impacts on mental health, depression. During that time, I think the story that still stands out to me is when I went up to Washington State and I interviewed a family whose son shot himself in the head because he fell into this massive depression. He had less than like a 5% chance to live, and the doctor saved his life. He had, I believe, less than like a 3% chance to get his speech back, and he got that back. And it was just almost this miracle. And I was just trying to put as many of these stories on the forefront and kind of bring those conversations, because during that time, it was always about COVID and the numbers, but it was never about the kids and the small business owners. And then, kind of after that, this border crisis just kind of fell on our laps. We didn't see it coming, and I've been trying to focus on that border as much as you can. And I just kind of to talk about that, moment. So literally last week on Friday, I've been really, we in the beginning of the border crisis, we've been really focusing on Texas because Texas has been greatly hit. But we're getting the reports that Yuma is kind of becoming this new hot zone. So we've been in Yuma documenting that. One thing that kind of stands out from Yuma and a big difference from Texas is the different nationalities that are making their way through Yuma. So when I'm in Texas, you're going to obviously run into your Central Americans. You're going to run into Venezuelans, a handful of Cubans, and really that's it. And obviously this last Haitian wave kind of hit us by surprise. But when I'm in Yuma, I'm meeting people from Georgia, Romania, Uzbekistan, India. I mean, I've never had this experience. And there's this area in Yuma. It's called the Gap. So I'm pretty sure you guys know it now. It's called the Gap because there's literally a gap of border wall. And I asked Border Patrol, why is there that gap? And they said, as soon as Biden got elected, construction just stopped on the border wall. So you literally have a gap, and the human smugglers are now using this route to smuggle migrants in at record numbers. I believe they're averaging 900 illegal crossings a day. There's also a news report, guys, for the audience to look up. Just last week on Tuesday, Border Patrol found a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old, 2 migrant little girls, sisters, abandoned in the middle of that Colorado River. So we've been in that Colorado River documenting the human smugglers on that route. And the crazy thing is they actually get paid on that route. So like we literally got video footage of smugglers getting paid on this route, taking the money and smuggling the migrants in. So we were there again on Friday morning, and you guys can see it in the video. I'm taking video of this human smuggler getting paid by a single male. That's already a big red flag, guys. So usually when you see these human smugglers are bringing in, families, kids, but anytime they have a single male, something is up. And according to Border Patrol, they suspect that migrant they were bringing in was either bringing in drugs or he's actually a member of the cartel. So we were actually filming this human smuggler with the single male, and he was receiving his cash payment. And you can see the human smuggler with a gun on his hip, which I didn't get to see it in person until he got a lot closer. And as soon as he actually is in our vicinity where he could see us filming, he got angry. So he was asking who I was, why was I taking video? And as he was saying this, he had his hand on his gun, and I stopped filming just because I was frightened. I didn't know what was going to happen in that moment. So I stopped filming. And as soon as I put the camera down, he starts yelling at me. He's like, put your phone on the ground. This is all in Spanish, of course. He's saying, put your phone on the ground, put your phone on the ground. And I just like, you know what? I'm like, my mind kind of blinked in the fear. And I said, you know what? I'm going to make a run for it. And if he shoots, I'm taking my chances. But I just knew in my head, I'm like, there's no way I'm going to let this human smuggler steal my phone and steal the video evidence. So I kind of blanked out. If it's never really happened to me before. And I just ran immediately to the border wall. And what people don't see is when I was running back, I ended up falling because I was just so nervous and the adrenaline. And then I made it back to the border wall. And it was something that it's a moment that, you'll never forget. And, in that moment, like I said, guys, I was just so scared, but I just knew that I wasn't going to give the human smuggler my phone because I knew that I wanted the American people to see the reality of this. And also how brazen these human smugglers are. I mean, this isn't daylight. This isn't in the nighttime. He's not even hiding. It's happening in the wide open because they know they're not going to get arrested. And that human smuggler, he could have shot at me and he wouldn't have got arrested or anything. There would have been no repercussions. So it's it's still kind of alarming. I'm still almost like processing it just because it's one of those moments that it's only for 30 seconds, but it felt like it was an hour. And, thank God that that moment didn't happen. You know, I still have a very overprotective mom. So when my mom found out about that, you could imagine she freaked out. But I think that moment was important to show the American people this is what's happening on your borders every single day. And the scary part is we only get to see a small fraction. I mean, this happens throughout the whole southern border. So I still can't believe that it's happening like that on American soil. But, I think the American audience is finally seeing the reality of everything down there.
Well, and again, for as much as everybody complained, well, as much as everyone didn't know the truth about the importance of a border wall, it's there so that this doesn't happen. And now we're finding that the places, like you said, such as the Gap, the places where the wall does not exist yet, is where all of these people are coming in. We don't see these sort of things in places where the wall is already in place. It's all of the areas that it is. Now, we truly understand that this is not just Central America, even South America. Like you said, we have people coming over from Europe being dropped into Mexico so that they can come across, or dropped wherever. I'm assuming they're dropped into Mexico, but so that they can come over at the border. And I've watched this video. I've seen a bunch of people repost that video. And again, like, thank you for being brave enough to stand there and do it, because you're right, these are the things that people need to see, but there sure as hell are not enough brave people out there to stand there and take it and make sure my phone, because I think about it, I'd be like, all right, here's my phone. Like, what? First of all, I wouldn't even understand you. That would be my first problem. But like, here we are, that we have very few, and for those of us who are on this side, I'll say this side of all the stuff going on, we are really seeing a lot of very brave men and women get in there, take their cameras, just become citizen journalists as well, because we don't see it. We will never see what's really going on if people that are brave, people like you who are really brave, don't step up and show what's really going on. So I really appreciate it, because you get to see really what's happening.
No, yeah, thank you. And I think I think for the American people, just overall, they are ready for a new type of journalism that shows you the frontline raw video, and it's like it's the best part of the video. It's there is no spin. It's all there in video evidence. And I just did a story. It was just 2 weeks ago. We did a news package where all we did was interview unaccompanied minors in Roma, Texas. And no one, I mean, so many people reached out to me and said, I've never seen this on the news, and the human trafficking aspect. And I said, it's happening right there. And also a lot of American people didn't even know about the bracelet system with the migrants. So something that we saw in Texas, just for the audience that doesn't know, is there's an area in Texas called Roma, Texas, and it's right across Mexico, and right there, what's just the boundary is just the Rio Grande River. And in all hours of the night, you could just see these rafts coming in, and these human smugglers just smuggling migrants, unaccompanied minors, throughout all hours of the night. I mean, these guys are so brazen with it. They don't even. We literally stand there with cameras and filming. They don't even care, because they know no arrest is going to happen. There's no consequences, and we just see these migrants being dropped off, and all these migrants have these bracelets on them. And that night, the bracelets were there are all these black bracelets, and there's going to have the Spanish word on them saying entregas, which means delivered. So they're literally treating migrants almost like an Amazon product, almost like a shipping product, with the proof of receipt. So for these migrants, they're not allowed to cross that river unless they paid a human smuggler. And for the human smugglers to keep track of that payment status, they literally put these bracelets on these migrants and treat them, like I said, like almost like a shipping product. And without that bracelet, a migrant can't cross the river. And I mean, so many Americans didn't even know about this system until we had it on video. We filmed it. We interviewed the unaccompanied minors that come on this way. I think one of the saddest kind of underreported stories is when we speak to these unaccompanied minors and say, hey, where's your mom and dad? Where's your parents? Where's your family? They always say, oh, back in Guatemala, back in Honduras, back in Nicaragua. And, it's a common thing where these parents send their unaccompanied minors by themselves with human smugglers, with human traffickers. Across the border, I mean, one thing that's not talked about is all the migrant women that get sexually assaulted and raped on the way to the border. A lot of these teenager boys, they're actually going to get kidnapped by the cartel, and they're going to get used actually as drug runners or hitmen for the cartel. It's one of the saddest things in the world. And the thing is, when these unaccompanied minors come into the US, it's not like they get the American dream right away. I mean, they get put in these foster care systems, they get lost in the system. And guys, no matter where it's a Republican or Democratic president, unaccompanied minors get lost in the system regardless by the thousands. I think Axios just put out a report in September. If this doesn't scare you, I don't know what else to say, but Axios put out a report saying 1 out of every 3 unaccompanied children that get released into the US, the US government loses track of.
Wait, I remember that story.
Yeah, and the situation is so bad. This is also according to Bloomberg Law. They put out the report. The situation is so bad that the Department of Justice has launched an investigation on the government to see if they're releasing unaccompanied children to labor traffickers in the United States. I mean, this is happening every single day and night. It's one of the saddest things in the world. And, we're just trying to show as much light to it as we can. And it's one of the things that don't get talked about enough, that Border Patrol agents, I mean, day and night, they always find unaccompanied children, toddlers that are abandoned by themselves on the border, all by themselves. Like I just said, just last week, guys, in that Yuma sector where I was, they found a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old, all by themselves. They're sisters. But those stories never make the headlines, right? Those stories never make the national news headlines. But the stories that do make it are, was the fake story on the Border Patrol whipping migrants. I mean, that one took the media storm. Right. It reaches the White House. But when these Border Patrol agents are saving kids, that never makes a national news headlines. And I think that's something that the American people are waking up to.
And the scariest thing for me is that it's not just like these kids are lost in the neighboring town. They're left in a country they don't even speak the language in. I mean, not that there aren't people who can communicate with them, but for the most part, don't even speak the language, have no idea what our customs are, don't even know what they're doing or where they're going, and they're just left here and in hopes of the American dream because someone paid them to drop their kids off. Who knows what the reason is behind what's happening, but it's not as American dream as people are thinking. And if you ever want, just look at your child. My boys are 11 and 13. They can barely make their own lunch. I couldn't imagine dropping them off in Mexico and hoping that they made it wherever they were supposed to make it. Like, that's wild to me. And so it's like, oh, they're just little kids and someone will take care of them. Who?
Well, and that's the other thing is most people are like, well, who's dropping them off? How are they getting there? And people don't realize that human trafficking is $150 billion industry. And that's not just a US problem. That is literally a global problem. And one other stat that really opened my eyes was the fact of the cartels and human smugglers, how you posted about how they make up to $14 million a day. And just looking at even like you being on the border crisis all over, they have no fear. And you're right there filming the transaction of them like handing over the money. And one thing that always gets me watching your videos is the children, because people are like, oh, that's not happening, or they turned a blind eye to it. And it's like, no, it's not like your 18-year-olds. It's literally as young as 2, 3 babies. And they all have a different role to play when it comes to the border, whether they get a new family and they cross in a car, or they're being used for the cartel and drugs. And people are like, well, how do they know? And it, like you said, the wristbands, and that will indicate if they're going to work for the cartel. And even like the girls, the females in the middle of the desert, like they're getting raped, and they're not all of them are always saved. You rarely ever, especially with the sheriffs and the border in our gaps, like there's not anyone helping.
There's not enough.
One of the disturbing things, and it's eerie just even saying it, and is when I was speaking to Border Patrol, I've seen pictures and videos of it, is when you're down there, there's a term called rape tree.
Mhm.
And there'll be areas in the border where these migrant women are sexually assaulted and raped. And what the human smugglers would do after this is they'll hang their clothes on the tree, almost like them showboating, saying, "We can do this. What are you gonna do about it?" And there was a reporter down there by the border. His name is Anthony Aguero, and he showed me a video where he stumbled upon it accidentally, but a migrant woman was being raped, and he got video and audio of it, and it's just you just can't believe that it's happening on U.S. soil and at the levels that it is, and especially the kids. When you're meeting these kids, it's one of the saddest things. I'm meeting as young as 4 years old, all by themselves. Like you said, they don't speak the language, so they'll be easily taken advantage of. I mean, even you guys know, even NBC News, who's a liberal mainstream news organization, even NBC News put out reports that migrants are being sexually assaulted in these migrant facilities. I mean, and then who are they supposed to report this to? Who's going to believe them? I mean, it's just a horrible system. And one of the thing about the border crisis that makes this worse than it really even worse than it already is because we have such a huge migrant influx that now Border Patrol and these systems and these facilities are overwhelmed. I mean, you go down to Texas and Arizona, these facilities are over capacity by over 100%. You'll find some facilities in Texas that are over capacity by 500%. I remember I did an interview with Congressman Brian Babin, who was able to answer one of these migrant facilities because till this day they're not letting media in because obviously they don't want
they don't want you in there.
Yeah, they don't want media to see how overcrowded these facilities are. So Brian Babin, who's a congressman in Texas, he's a really good congressman. He's been fighting this issue. He was able to tour one of these facilities. He got some photos for me, and what he told me, he said, "Jorge, these facilities, some of these rooms are only made for like 50 people at the most." He said they're holding up to 600 people. Each of these rooms, you got people sleeping on top of each other. You got sexual assaults and rapes going on in these facilities. And, for me, I think it's appropriate to call it a humanitarian crisis, what's happening on the border. I think Americans, when they think humanitarian crisis, they think, oh, that only happens in Africa. That happens in Yemen.
That's the commercials.
Yeah. And it's like, no, it's happening here. And I think one thing is the Latino base or voter base, they're starting to wake up to this problem, and they're seeing the impacts directly. One of the more kind of fascinating things to look at is in 2016, all those border towns in Texas are, first of all, the populations are overwhelmingly Latino in all these border towns in Texas. In 2016, all these border towns voted for Hillary Clinton, and it wasn't even close. I forgot about how many points they won it. Fast forward to 2020, all those border towns swung Republican because they see the border crisis firsthand. So this is one of those issues where, if you're the Biden administration, if you don't start attending to it or fixing it, you're gonna lose a lot of that voter base that voted for him in 2020. So this is one of the issues where I think the Latino base is waking up and they're angry about. I think when I speak to Latino voters, what makes them very angry is that, during the Donald Trump years, you had AOC and you had all these Democratic Congress men and women down there at the border taking pictures and crying and talking about the inhumane conditions. I mean, those conditions are 10 times worse what they were, and you don't see any of them down there of talking about this issue. So one thing, whether you're a Democrat, whether you're Republican, this is not even a Democrat-Republican issue. This is an American issue. This is an issue that if you're an American, if you're a human, I mean, I don't know how you look at this and turn a blind eye to it. This is something that is horrible. And then the thing is, these policies, we're only empowering the bad guys. We're literally empowering the cartel. So the cartel is laughing at us because they're taking advantage of the situation. And, for them, these humans that they're smuggling in, these people, these kids, these women, for them, it's just products, because what they'll do is, and this is kind of a tactic, is they'll rush all these families and caravans into Pacific areas of the border. So what happens is if you're the border patrol, they get overwhelmed because you have to process, you have to separate the unaccompanied minors for those from the family units. It's this whole process. You got to call extra agents. And when this happens, the drugs come into this country at a faster pace than ever. I think I was speaking to one FBI agent who told me that the fentanyl in the country has increased by over 600%. I was even interviewing the police chief down there in San Luis, right next to Yuma. He said fentanyl has already increased by 200% in that sector. So if you think, oh well, I live in Kentucky or I live in Michigan, I don't. This area doesn't impact me. It does, because those drugs are going to come into your town. These the scary numbers is when you guys look at these apprehension numbers per month. So we're still waiting for the apprehension months of last month, but I know for July and August was the first time ever in Border Patrol history we reached back-to-back over 200,000 apprehensions. That number should scare you, but the crazy part is that's not even counting the number of gotaways. So gotaways are the migrants that come into this country that don't get apprehended and that we have no information on, and most likely they are the criminals, because right now, the innocent people that are being taken advantage by cartels and smugglers, they want to be apprehended. They want to be apprehended by the Border Patrol. They're not trying to run away. It should worry us when these gotaway numbers, because those are the migrants that want to got away, meaning they got criminal history. That means they're bringing drugs into the country, very violent past. That's a scary number as well. So they're making their way into American towns, and this is something that should concern us, especially the fentanyl problem. I mean, that's an issue that's becoming a big problem in our country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Sheriff Lamb talked about that a couple of weeks ago, that the fentanyl just in his county, in Pinal County, went from a couple of years ago enough to be a few tablets to being like to the millions of tablets, and the amount that is there. And he made a really good point. Same thing that you just said is, if you think that the border states are really where the problem is, you're wrong. Although that's where it's coming across. They're going to spread to every state in our country because their whole goal is to sell whatever it is. And that's super interesting, the idea of, like you said, the gotaway numbers, because I could totally see them bringing in people to get caught so they sneak around the backside. Like, that's the whole idea is if they can catch 70 people at the border in one day, those people are going on the other side, or they're going a different space, so that they know how, they're criminals. They know how to get through. They know what they're doing. This isn't the first time. Yeah.
One thing too, that Border Patrol tells us, is like, hey, this is a sophisticated cartel. These guys are not like these thugs off the street. They got the technology that Border Patrol has. They have endless amount of money and resources, so they're as equipped or even more equipped than the Border Patrol here. One thing that kind of stood out is when I was interviewing the police chief down there in San Luis. He says, hey, the cartel is actually 10 years ahead of us, and we're playing catch up to these guys. So it's completely insane. It's even more crazier when you're down there. And one of the big things is, like, in that Del Rio, when they got hit by those 15,000 Haitians, those Texas Border Patrol units, they had to call Border Patrol agents from all over Texas just to be at that sector. And from there to Laredo, even to McAllen, they had a bunch of Border Patrol's checkpoints completely unmanned. I mean, you could literally drive through them unmanned. So you would have to imagine that the cartel took advantage of all that when all those resources were getting paid attention to the Haitians. And when I was in Del Rio, I would just drive to the gas station, and they would literally be releasing Haitians at the gas station, and I would just jump out the car and I would interview the Haitians right there. I said, hey, have you been like tested for COVID-19 before being released into the public? They would just be honest. They're like, no, we haven't been tested. And I was like, what? And, we did a bunch of interviews. We put those videos out. And then a couple of days later, DHS Secretary Mayorkas came out and said, hey, we just released 12,000 Haitians into the American public. They have not been tested for COVID-19, which to me, it's like, well, first of all, you're telling us that we're going through a pandemic. You're shutting down businesses. You're firing people at this point if they don't get this mandatory vaccine. Yet you're releasing these Haitian migrants that they're not just carrying COVID. They have other diseases, but they're positive for COVID-19. You're just releasing them into the public. They're going to be riding in our planes and buses. And when I would ask the Haitians, what state are you going to? the number one answer I heard was Florida. And that makes sense because there's a large Haitian community in Florida and they have family down there. But it's just one of those things where, you have the establishment telling us, take this virus seriously. You have to get the shot or you can't come to work. Yet you're allowing an unprecedented number of illegals into the country and then releasing them into the public. So it's like, which one is it? You can't have the best of both worlds. So we're also in this moment where we have to call out the establishment and what's going on with this hypocrisy of well, you're telling us this, but you're doing this. And I think that's also a thing that the American people are becoming very angry with.
Well, yeah, and it goes back to your idea of the shelters that they have and the different buildings where you're now having, even if it was 50 people in a room, we now have 600, but we can't have 20 kids in a room without a mask at school, or they can't be in school at all. And we can't have them playing together or touching or doing all this. That's the part that starts to drive me crazy about, and I'm gonna say about American citizens. Why are you not awake to the hypocrisy of it all? Why are you still like, I got to put my mask on and I can't have to send my kid to school with a mask? But you're perfectly okay with this happening, and it's in complete contradiction to what they are telling you is happening over here. We have businesses shutting down, but we are giving tons of money to people who are coming in, but that money couldn't be found to give to the businesses to keep them open. Stop with the hypocrisy. That's the part that's making me crazy. Like, just make it make sense is what is the common theme.
Yeah. And the thing that's also not talked about enough is the impact on the local border towns when they get hit with these influxes. So for those who don't know, the small town of Del Rio in Texas, it's only a population of 35,000. The whole town itself only has 5 ambulances. So during this Haitian influx, all those ambulances and resources had to be used on the Haitian migrants. So if you're a taxpayer and your grandma needed to go to the hospital in an emergency, well, she has to wait 2 hours now because one of those ambulances that would be used for your taxpayer American grandma is now being used on a Haitian migrant. And the city of Del Rio, they had to close the port of entry because of the influx was so hard. So when they closed the port of entry, Del Rio lost an average of $17,000 a day. A bunch of businesses in Del Rio actually had to close down because a lot of their workers come from the Mexican side, so they couldn't come over. And that's the type of things that don't get talked about enough, is that also that impact on these small towns they're not made to take on these huge influxes. So these are towns with really small police departments, small sheriff departments, and now all those resources have to attend to that first before the American taxpayer citizens. So that's a huge impact. That's also getting talked about enough. And the mayor of Del Rio, I want to make it clear, he's been ringing this alarm since the beginning of the border crash. I mean, I remember being down there. He was trying to get Biden's attention. He was trying to get AOC's attention. He was also trying to get even Governor Greg Abbott. A lot of these mayors in these border towns, they're not happy with the Republican Governor Greg Abbott. They feel like he hasn't been strong enough on the border issue, that they haven't heard really much about him. Senator Ted Cruz, I know when I was speaking to Mayor Don McLaughlin in Uvalde, he was very upset that Senator Ted Cruz wouldn't even give him a call back. So this is an issue that whether you're a Republican, like I said, whether you're Republican or a Democrat, this is an American issue. And we need to start looking at that and, stop politicizing these things and say, how can we solve this? And if you're a big corporation, the big corporations love a border crisis, because that means keep wages down for the American workers. They're able to hire under the table. And that's also another thing that we need to, that needs to be addressed as well.
Well, too, and most people, especially when they think unaccompanied minors, one thing that I loved about one of your videos was you showed the communities in that area, how they really stepped up and helped, like especially the starving children. And going back to that is with the unaccompanied minors, is so many people are like, oh, well, they'll just put him into the foster care. Definitely want to emphasize, a lot of them are coming over without any identification. And if they're with a sibling or family, most of those people get separated. and they get used in different parts again, whether it be the cartel or the moms and the kids usually are joined with another family to help cross that border. So definitely want to point that out, because people are always like, oh, well, they'll just get put in the foster care. But then you also look at our foster care and our CPS system, and they're even corrupt too. They're trafficking, using your tax-paying dollars and trafficking the children. So yeah, if one person captures them, it's basically a catch and release. They just, we in the trafficking world, I always say they just got a new handler.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard one person, they mentioned to me like, oh, well, we have, 2 million parents ready to adopt. And I was like, well, I mean, have you looked at the foster care system? I mean, it's not really the greatest system. I mean, we're literally losing migrant kids in that system. These kids are getting sexually abused in that system. And if you're one of these migrant unaccompanied minors, who could you tell? Who could you report this to? Because you have no one to look over you. We just got done filming a doc. So I'm in California, for those who don't know, and I live in an area that's heavily desert area. And we just got done with this documentary. I guess you guys are getting a scoop on here in this podcast. So, but it's gonna be coming out soon. But essentially here, what I'm seeing, and this is in my own hometown, which is the scary part, is that the drug cartels are moving into these deserts, taking over these desert properties, and starting up drug operations. Well, guess who's their labor force for this drug operations? Is these unaccompanied children and these migrants smuggled from the border. So, during our reporting, we literally found out that these migrants on these drug operations are essentially indentured servants. They're literally slaves on American soil. And that's something that, if you told that to someone, they wouldn't believe it. I'm like, yeah, it's happening here in the US. These cartels are moving into Southern California now. And this is happening all over the country, but here in this area where we call Antelope Valley, Palmdale, San Bernardino County, these cartels have moved in. They'll start up illegal marijuana operations. And the people that work these illegal marijuana operations are not the cartel members, are the smuggled migrants and children who are forced to work these drug operations. And these cartels even arm these folks to get in gunfights with other cartels. And that's the reality, where these migrants are being viewed as indentured servants. And like I said a little bit earlier, with the unaccompanied minors, I mean, Bloomberg Law had a report. The Department of Justice is even investigating the government to see, hey, are we releasing children to labor traffickers in the United States? I mean, it's insane. I mean, when you got that, and then that stat from Axios, 1 out of every 3 unaccompanied children are getting lost in the system. I mean, that's heartbreaking. I think you guys saw it in that news report. It was like the 4-minute video where all I did was interview unaccompanied minors. My first interview was with 3 unaccompanied minors, 7-year-old, 10-year-old, and a 6-year-old, who were it was 2 brothers and a sister. And the sad thing about that interview, in my head, I'm like, wow, look at these, got 2 brothers and a sister, unaccompanied, no parents. 1 out of them is gonna get lost in the system. I mean, 1 of them we're gonna just lose total complete track of. I mean, if that doesn't break your heart, I don't know what does. So, we just been trying to get as much of these kind of interviews with these kids out and show people like, hey, this is real. And kind of like you said before, this is trying to play into the role of a voice for the voiceless, and trying to share these stories that that really don't make it on the mainstream. And I'm just glad that at the Daily Caller they literally just giving me the keys and the freedom to just do whatever I want to do and focus on the issues that are really important. And it's a big deal when someone like the Daily Caller lets you do that, because since the Daily Caller is in Washington, D.C., we're now finally forcing D.C. and the establishment media to talk about these stories. Now they can't ignore them anymore. They're right there in their face. So, luckily, we're trying to do the best we can of getting it out there with, and with podcasts like yours. I think a lot of the American people are really seeing the reality and things. And what I try to do, as always, and as you guys know by now, is get the video, right? Because the video, you can't spin it. I could talk about it all day long. We could make tweets and write articles, but when you see the video, there's no denying it. It's right there. Video evidence of human smuggling on the rafts, the human smuggling at the Colorado River, the kids with the bracelets, the migrant women with the bracelet. Right when people see the video, they say, okay, there's no disputing this. This is real. This is raw. and it's happening all day and all hours of the night. I mean, it's sad to say, but as we're speaking right now, migrants are being smuggled into the country at record numbers.
I really like that you brought up the bipartisan issue that we have, because even my parents, my in-laws, they really like to push the well, if the Democrats wouldn't. And I don't know how many times I have to be like, there are equally as many Republicans that are doing absolutely nothing, or are just as blackmailed, or are just as in the trenches with whatever. Just because they have an R next to their name literally means nothing anymore. I don't even care which direction you go. And so being able to look at it, and it's so interesting to me that all, which of course we knew, but all of the things, they all lead back to this. And it's all the idea of there is some level. You brought up the indentured servitude, and it's the idea that, okay, you don't want to call them slaves, but that's what they are when they get brought in. You don't want to use that term anymore because it's gone, but are you going to fight for these people? Because that's actually what's happening. And we even had a lady on a couple weeks ago that she was adopted from Colombia with her sisters, and they were brought into a family in which that's exactly what happened to them. They were brought in with the American dream and blah, blah, blah. And this family, they had their own kids and their own life. And then they had their adopted family, and they're the ones who did the work, and they were beaten and they were abused, and they had all of these things as if they were the dogs that they adopted from the pound, but they were human. And it's happening all over. You'll see these families, oh, they look so beautiful at church, or they look so beautiful on their Christmas card, but the one and they adopted a child. How nice of them. And this isn't everyone, so I don't want it to make a blanket statement like anyone who adopts a kid is wrong. But there are plenty of people, like you said, there's 2 million families who are ready to adopt a child. Are they? I mean, are they going to do it the right way? Are they nice people who really can't have kids and they want to have a child? Or do they already have their family? They just want to look good and they're going to go beat them over off to the side. Those are things we have to consider. And this is going to happen even more because now we have all of these kids with no place to go.
Well, too, and even like the foster care and for adoption process, that whole process, like who's checking the government? Who's checking the checker? And we need to hold them accountable because there's not much of a process to go through. And as far as like background checks and all of that, like we've normalized trusting just anyone with our children. And whether it's in the school system or going to your everyday sports, you see, even in our own area, we've seen swim teachers who got caught for the sexual assaults to children. You see more and more rape stories every day happening in your churches, your school systems, all over. So when you say it's not happening in my town or my community, it is, but it's not going to change until each and every single person steps up and stops turning away.
No, exactly. And, you know, as Americans, we got to stop, turning the blind eye, to these problems and, face them up and, speak about them. That's just one thing that I've been, just really passionate about it is at least getting the conversation going on these issues, showing folks just the raw truth. And like you said, it was an argument I heard that they're like, oh, we have 2 million families just ready to adopt. And I'm like, well, the foster care system really isn't working out too well. I don't know how much I trust that, especially, the kids who are getting the most sexual assaults and raped are these kids because they're the most vulnerable. They have no one to report it to. They don't speak the language. They're already scared. They don't know exactly what's happening to them in the process, So, and then it's a common case where these kids are getting released to sponsors, and they're really getting released to sexual traffickers or labor traffickers, where they essentially become slaves on American soil. It's just it's heartbreaking. And like we were saying before, is just because the person has an R next to the name doesn't mean they're fighting the issue. That's one thing that I've been trying to kind of wake up the American people is a lot of the Republicans, they'll just come out and say, whatever sounds sexy, but they're not going to do something when it comes legislative. So, it's easy for a Republican governor to say, oh, Biden's border crisis. and then do nothing about it. I mean, do absolutely nothing about it. This happens all the time. They just come out and say, oh, socialism is bad, vote for me. And then it's like, but what are you doing
Gonna do.
yeah to combat this or under any other issue? And I the sentiment of Tucker Carlson, if you guys been watching Tucker in the past 3 weeks, he's been really going at Governor Greg Abbott. Tucker was like, hey, we have a border crisis on a Republican state. Texas is a Republican state last time we checked. How can you still be allowing this at the numbers that it is? We can't be always pointing fingers and saying Biden, Biden, Biden. It takes time for the Republican Party to stand up, to fight. And if they don't, the base is going to go somewhere else. But, like I said, we're trying to highlight as much of it as we can. And we're going to continue. This is something that we're going to, continue going. So, we've been in Texas focusing on that. And like I told you guys, we're now focusing our eyes on Arizona, especially that Yuma sector, because that Yuma sector, just in stats. So for those who don't know, in August of 2020, agents in that Yuma sector encountered 694 migrants. So that's not even 1,000 migrants they encountered in that month. Compare that to August 2021, they encountered over 17,000. So just comparing those months, year by year comparison, already a 2,000% increase in Yuma sector. When I speak into agents down there, they're so undermanned. I wish I could show you guys these videos of the agents telling us, we literally, as a reporter, I'm literally fighting the migrants before the Border Patrol is. So Border Patrol is so undermanned. It's a common thing where we'll literally encounter these migrants before Border Patrol even knows about them. So in a way, we're even doing Border Patrol's job of like, we encounter the migrants and then we have to go find the Border Patrol agents to direct them. I mean, yeah, it's something out of a movie. You don't expect that. And then, those moments right there in that Colorado River where we're just filming these human smugglers out in the open. These guys have no worry in the world, smuggling humans, and then taking the payment right in front of us. It's almost like they're just literally almost, talking trash to us right there in person, just saying like, what are you going to do about it? We dare you to arrest us or enforce law. So it's something that like, it's even to this day, like even covering every day, it's still mind boggling of just kind of how open, how brazen, how undermanned Border Patrol is. Like I said, it's such a common thing when I'm in Texas and Arizona where we are finding these migrants before Border Patrol could even get to them. I mean, like I said, it's something like out of a movie.
Border Patrol was already low staffed to begin with.
Oh, right.
Last year. And then to all of a sudden be like, who would have said, hey, we should staff up 2,000% this year because we know this is coming. No one's ready for that.
Yeah, even talking to Sheriff Lamb, and he said even with the whole defund the police movement, the first department that was to go basically for him, even for his border and human trafficking, even to try to help on the border and investigate, because there's a huge process and all of that. He has one person on his team working that department. So it's like, it's so mind-boggling to say, like, what do you mean? Like, where are the government, especially when it comes to law enforcement and all of the whole money aspect? It's like, where is the government putting the funds? Like
their pockets.
So when people sit there and say, whether you're a Republican, Democrat, it doesn't matter. Every child's life matters, and no child should ever have to, endure all of the trauma that they're getting this young. Just imagine now when they get older, if they even make it out of the system, if they even make it out alive. And it's like the whole trust issues, trauma, all of that, it's already broken because they have no one to turn to. And going off of just even you on the front lines, for our listeners, if you can share based on your experience, how do you, especially being in the reporting on the front lines, giving us raw, real material, how do you deal with adversity when in moments like this, where people who are in journalism aren't even, I'm going to say they're not doing their job, and they are literally causing so much depression, suicide, everything that you've seen over the past year and a half in this pandemic. So how do you deal with adversity and everything that you're facing head on?
So one big thing with me, and it started off with the riots, is let's say last summer, let's say I'll be in Portland, and we'll cover a riot there for like a week. When I get back, it's a lot to process just as a regular person, just because at that time I was going to a community college and then just jumped into the riot. So for me, it wasn't like I can't, I was ready for that. And I'm when you're covering the riots, you're seeing innocent people, journalists getting assaulted, brutally assaulted. I mean, there was a couple of instances I didn't know if I was watching a homicide. You come back home, and it does take time. I spend a few days like processing everything. One thing that helps me is I tune out of the news. So I know for a lot of people, it's like a weird thing to hear a journalist say that, but like I'll come back, and this happens with the border too, is, you kind of have to, process everything. And then when I get back home, I'll kind of tune out of the news, and I'll just kind of like reflect. I think a big thing in journalism that you want to have is empathy. Empathy is just a way, it helps you be a better storyteller. So I like to just tune out of everything. I'll take a few days just on my own, not thinking about news, just reflecting, try to get some family time in. And that's what kind of, I think, just keeps me kind of sane and grounded. And, when it comes to the adversity part and everything else, is just that, I don't know what it is, like kind of about me, but it's just that, I'm just motivated to really kind of inform and just show kind of the American people the other side of stories that you don't get. And there's there's moments that help me keep me going. I remember when I was covering the restaurant stuff in the beginning and seeing all those restaurants going out of business. Every interview I did with business owners, they would cry, and they're crying to me. But after the interviews, they would say, "Thank you, Jorge, for doing this. Without you, we would not have a voice. Without you, we couldn't get a story out." It feels good to have someone listen and care. Those moments, it's all, just keep you going. It gives you this added fuel. And I'm really appreciative of my audience, man, because anytime I come back from trips or putting stuff up, people always give me direct feedback. For instance, like on Friday when I ran into that armed human smuggler, and I told, basically, I post a picture, just wanted to let everyone know that happened. I mean, so many people called in and checked up on me. They sent messages, "Hey, are you doing okay?" And it feels good. It feels good knowing that you have this community that is supporting you. And it's just those things. It keeps me motivated. Both of my parents, they came from El Salvador as immigrants. And I think that just kind of pushes me as well. As, I want to leave kind of a legacy for my parents, but it's just those moments really keep you going. When you're down there covering the border, people would say, "Hey man, if it wasn't what you're doing, this stuff would never get out." So those moments keep me going. I'm a regular person just like everyone else. So when you deal with moments like this, when you're seeing kids smuggled and all this stuff, like I said, I get back from these trips, I take time off. I don't look at the news. I try to connect with family, and just, really just kind of reflect, practice empathy. And, those things for sure, really, really help me out. And I've been blessed in that area. The funny thing is, like, when I come back from those trips, people message me like, "Jorge, did you see this on the news? Did you see this article?" And I'll just be like, "No, I haven't actually. I don't know anything that you're talking about." So those moments definitely help me out. Like I said, tuning out for a little bit helps me out. But what kind of, I would say, keep me going is actually just the American people that are in constant communication with me, letting me know that they appreciate what's going on. And that kind of keeps me in the fight, if that will.
And
Definitely.
that's awesome. And that's good advice for anybody, like somebody that's in it and doing all the stuff. Like, he will pull away from the news and not watch anything. And I say that to my husband all the time. The kids will be out front with the neighbor kids, or we'll be at a little league game or whatever. And I was like, if you never watched the news, you would have no clue that something was going on, because everybody lives their life as normal. And so, not that you don't want to not be aware of what's happening, but pull away for a little bit, because you actually will realize that humanity still exists if you go in and talk to other people.
Oh, I absolutely agree. I always tell my friends who like are not like, I tell my friends all the time, I'm like, if you're not working in news or journalism, you should not be like looking at the news like that. I'm like, if you're just like if your job or career doesn't require the news, I mean, I would obviously you want to stay informed, so like you stay tuned in, but don't want to go overboard. Like I try to recommend it to my friends all the time. I'm like I don't go overboard. I don't let myself go overboard at all. It's just not good for you, and you say a lot more angry all the time. So
Yeah.
it's the little things, step away, take times to speak to your friends and family. And I mean, look, obviously there's so many things going on in the country that it feels like it's going downhill. But when you really just kind of take a pause and reflect, there's so much beautiful moments and everything. And even for me, like I said, I always take a step back, reflect, and at the end of the day, we still live in the greatest country in the world, and that's always a big blessing. And you want to just pass that on to your kids. So that's a big thing with me. So I always take a step back. Like I said, if you don't work in the news or anything, don't stay tuned in. Like I said, always, fall back a little bit. Enjoy these little moments. We'll never get them back, and kind of enjoy the process and journey we're all in. At the end of the day, if you're in the fight, you're in a good fight. I think the best advice is always go with happy warrior. So happy warrior is always the way to go for me. And I've been blessed that I have I'm surrounded by good people that keep me in the fight, that keep me motivated, and it's a big blessing. I definitely don't take it for granted.
Well, we truly appreciate you joining us today. And again, continually bringing us those frontline headline stories that you won't see on mainstream media, giving it to us real and raw footage, as most people will say, oh, well, did he really just post that? And especially like this last experience of him literally being gun pointed, like on the hip, human smuggler. He's doing it to show the American people what the reality of the world is. So make sure when you're following his page, and we'll make sure to link all of his social media in the show notes, literally take a step back and disconnect and really tune into what he's saying and what footage he's giving you, because you won't see it anywhere else. You won't see those live interviews with the unaccompanied minors. You won't see there. You don't even see the human smugglers doing transactions, let alone human trafficking, on mainstream media. So really take it for face value that this is real. This is raw footage. This is happening in America. And it's not, again, it's a global issue. It is a humanity crisis. So again, we will make sure to tune into the show notes, all of his social media pages. And thank you again. We truly appreciate it. As always, survivors, we hear you, we see you, we stand by you, sending you love, light, and blessings. And again, thank you for being a powerful voice for the voiceless.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. We definitely got to do it again soon.
We will.
Yeah.
We definitely got to do it again soon. Thank you guys for having me on and just getting this information out to more people. I feel it's so important. One thing that kind of irks me is people are like, "Oh, I wish someone was covering the border." I'm like, "Yeah, we got it, guys." So no, I really appreciate having me on. Would definitely love to do it again. I'll send you guys as soon as we get it approved. I'll send you guys this the trailer before the public sees it. Got a new documentary. It's gonna set to release really soon. It's connected to drug cartels, human smuggling here on American soil. And just continue, like I said, to follow. We're gonna continue to be at the border. We'll be back at the border in November. So we'll be back, continuing all the coverage, all the frontline stuff. Thank you once again. This was great.
Thank you.
course.
Stay safe.
Yeah, stay safe, and we'll definitely have you back. And before you launch your release date, just let us know and we'll have you back, and we'll kind of do a little exclusive and share that with everyone listening.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you guys so much.
All right. Thank you.